Hello, everybody. Welcome back to this week's episode of the Clonestar Pod. I am your host, Mike Overton, and joining me in the co-host seat is my usual co-host, Joseph Hurley. Sho, how are you?
Not too bad, Mike. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Now, this week we have an incredible guest who has directed some of my favourite Star Trek episodes, including Frame of Mind, The Way of the Warrior, The Persistence of Vision. He's also worked on some incredible projects such as The Orville, The Magicians, Burke's Law, Charmed, as well as DS9, Voyager, TNG, and Enterprise. Our guest this week is the wonderful Jamie Conway. Jamie, thank you so much for joining us.
Glad to be here. Thanks so much.
Awesome. So, I'll tell you what, let's start a little bit at the beginning. How did you get into directing?
I was in film school at the University of Denver.
Right.
I went there in 68 to start. So in 1970, I was in the office. I was a senior, beginning of senior year, and the phone call came in, and it was a local guy who was industrial films, commercials, needed some cheap labor, needed an editor, and I said, I'm your guy. So I started working for him, and while still going to school and finishing my senior year, I was editing for him. And after about 3 months, I said, I can direct these commercials better than the people you're hiring. And he gave me a shot. I was 20 years old, total chutzpah, but it came naturally to me. I started directing and directed some really important commercials that got a lot of attention. And this guy was a real entrepreneur, and I worked with him on and off for many years. And based on our early success, eventually he made a movie called The Legend of Grizzly Adams. And then we sold it as a TV series to NBC.
Yep. And
so at 25 years old, I was directing episodic television for NBC for the Grizzly Adams show. And you look at me now, I'm 73 years old. I have a baby face. If you could imagine me at 25, I looked like I was 15. I used to go on the set to introduce myself, and people would look at me like I was kidding when I said I was the director, because I looked like I wasn't even a grip. I was more like the grip's son.
Hang on a second, Jamie.
Hang
on a second. At 20 years old, did you really believe that you could direct those adverts better than the people?
Yeah, I actually did think I could. What happened when I was a kid, I was always fascinated by movies and television, and I used to sit at the edge of my mother's bed and watch hours on end. And I would say I can't go to sleep until I see a commercial I haven't seen before, just some random thing to keep me watching. And it was a thing in New York. I was living in New York till I was 10, and there was a thing called the $1 Million Movie. And what they would do is take classic movies and run it 9 times a week. They would run it twice every day on the weekends, and then every day during the week. So when I saw a movie that I liked, like Yankee Doodle Dandy or Hunchback of Notre Dame, I watched it so many times. And I started, imagining how they made the movies. And then when I was 14, we went on a trip to the Grand Canyon in San Francisco, and it ended in Los Angeles. And we had a tour of the studios, and we had a backlot tour of Paramount, I think, and they had a stunt show. But that hooked me. And when I went back in high school, then I got a Super 8 camera and started making movies. So I was quite fluent with what limited knowledge I had, and confident. And in my first 3 years of college, I had made a number of short films and documentaries and things that you do. But it was chutzpah, and as happens in life, if you reach for something and then you succeed, it can lead to more good things.
Yep.
And in the television and movie business, it's all freelance. I mean, you're not working for a big corporation. You got to earn every job and keep every job every year of your career. So you have to keep delivering, and long-term careers are built on people who are able to move and change as time goes by. I mean, I started directing in 1970, episodic television in 75, and I didn't retire until 2020. So an awful lot of technological changes and things happened, and styles of shows, and I just kept changing with them. But it was all based on a real love of the art form.
So did you always want to direct? Is that what you set your mind to from day one? Or was that just so happened that you thought, oh, well, I can do this better, so let's give it a bash?
I was also a writer early on as a kid, and my career involved writing and producing and directing. And because early in those days, there weren't many people who did all three successfully. it led to a long-term career because when I wasn't directing, I would be producing, and if I wasn't working, I could write a pilot and create my own work. And frankly, as a producer, when you're producing a series, you get a fee for every episode. So if you have to do 22 episodes a season, you're getting a fee for all 22 episodes. When you're just an episodic director, if you're incredibly busy, you may do 7 or 8 episodes a year. So you can see there's a real financial advantage to be able to produce and to write. And it really served me well over the years. So when I wasn't working on one, I could work on the other.
So when you were 20,
the thing that I love the most, I'm built for, I always knew I was great at, I feel most comfortable doing, is directing.
So when you were 25 on the set of Grizzly Adams and people were there going, who the hell is this kid? At what point did you kind of really feel that people were looking at you going, that's the director? That's not, the Grip's son or anything like that. That's the main guy who's going to basically tell us what to do today.
Well, then we had our own company. To make Grizzly Adams, we moved from Los Angeles to Park City, Utah, where I recently bought a home 5 years ago. I moved back there for 6 months a year. I love it there. It's a beautiful place, ski resort, and the crew was our crew. It was we were making, besides Grizzly Adams, we also were a 4-wall company. We did movies, docudrama kind of things in those days. Search of Noah's Ark, Beyond and Back,
Yep.
The Bermuda Triangle, things like that were going along. So we were doing movies as well as the television stuff, and so the crew, it was my crew. So I felt with them, I always felt like I was in control. And it was a great place to learn and earn because the company that we worked for at Sun Classic also owned a comic book called Classics Illustrated. I don't know if you guys remember this, but it used to be comic books of all the classics. And so you would read Ivanhoe and it would be just, a comic book version. So it was before Cliff Notes, it was what people would read. So we took that and went to NBC and sold a series of 12 movies of the week, Classic Illustrated Presents. And we made Last of the Mohicans and Huckleberry Finn and The Time Machine and all these movies. We were a bunch of kids in our 20s. We didn't know what the hell we were doing. if anybody with half a brain had said, you're going to do what? How are you going to do this? We just figured it out as we went. So it was a great place to learn and earn, and I got so much experience doing so many different genres and working in so many different states and meeting so many different actors and people that over those 6 years, I built a huge resume and a lot of confidence and made a lot of friends. And so when I left Sun Classic and went back to Los Angeles, I started working for Aaron Spelling on a show called Matt Houston. And like you'll see as my life goes on, that relationship with Aaron Spelling and Duke Vincent, his partner, in 1982, lasted until the company folded in 2006. I would come and go from that company as I would leave to go do other projects. Then when I was available, I'd come back and eventually became executive vice president and ran production there for 6 years before becoming the producer director on Charmed for the last 5 years of its run.
Yep.
And the other long-term relationship I had was Star Trek, where I was involved in the very first season of Next Generation. I did episode 6 or 7 to the very last season of Enterprise.
Yep.
I did the penultimate episode and the pilot for the show.
Yeah.
And so that was an 18-year run on that show. And in fact, I had lunch with Rick Berman yesterday.
Oh my word.
So one of the other secrets to my success was long-term relationships with the people I worked with.
Right.
And so that was great. So anyway, now I'm in Hollywood and working for Aaron, and I did a couple of shows for him. And then the shows I was producing were canceled, so I started directing again. I did Hotel and I did MacGyver. Now MacGyver was a Paramount show.
Yep.
And I loved the show. They loved me, and they were starting a new show, a syndicated show called Star Trek: The Next Generation. And they asked would I be interested in meeting on that to see if I would do an episode or two. So I met with Gene Roddenberry and Rick Berman, who had been assigned by Paramount to work with him. And we got along, and they gave me an assignment to do three episodes the first season. But as it turned out, because of a writer's strike and their scheduling, it only became 2 episodes. I did. What was the name of that first episode?
Justice.
Justice, those crazy wardrobe, and then the season finale. And I'll tell you a funny story. I've only done one convention. It was in Vegas, maybe 15 years ago, 10, 12 years ago, whatever it was. But I'm going to there, and there's like 10,000 fans. I was blown away by the sight of it, and everybody in uniform, and a bunch of them were wearing the Justice skimpy clothes. It was very funny.
Jamie, I have to ask you this. So, like, as you said, like, as you went through your career and you got confidence on it, when you were young, as you said, you were just a group of kids. Where did you all get the confidence to approach the studios, say, hey guys, we've got an idea? Were you just bluffing and just kind of saying, surely at some point someone's going to realize we have no experience and this could all go bad very, very easily?
You know, failure was never in my mind. I never thought we would fail. It was just total naivety. I mean, I knew that if I could envision it, I could find a way to shoot it. And I never really considered failure an option. It didn't come into my brain until I left Sun Classic and came to Hollywood and got into the real game in Los Angeles and network television at the highest level possible, that I could see failure left and right as people would come and work for me and not do well, and then you have to replace them. And you know, that in that big churning machine of turning out high quality television every week, it's a much tougher position. But I was protected at Sun Classic. It was my company, my crews. You know, I made most of the creative decisions. So it was an unusual circumstance that would never happen again. And in those days, in Utah, we were non-union for crew. We were Writers Guild and Screen Actors Guild. But that sort of protected us too. People came to us because we were inexpensive, and that was a plus because people trying to save money. So that helped us too.
And Jamie, like, we're talking to you the grand total like 11 minutes or something like that, and already I can see that you're a cool, calm, collected, very kind of lovely fella. Was there any days where you were there going, what am I doing? This is so stressful. I've made a dreadful decision in my career. I should just get out of this. Or are you always there going, it's fine. Failure is not an option. We'll get through this.
There have been times. There have been some trying times along the way. But as a whole, I'm a positive guy. And you find a way through. The nice thing about directing is every day there's a goal. You know, you have 6 pages, 8 pages, whatever it is, but you've got a certain amount of work you have to get done, and hopefully 12 hours. And there's a beginning and an end. And when you can finish the day's work, there's a great sense of satisfaction of a job well done. You got to repeat it the next day, but there's that beginning, middle, and end part of every day that I really always enjoyed. And there's been some actors who were incredibly frustrating to work with, and you know, production issues where things didn't happen the way they should have. But on the whole, I was always went into it, came out of it with a really, really positive attitude about it.
You strike me as somebody that on the set would be very collaborative with people, would talk to people and say what's the best way forward, and not be kind of like authoritarian on the set, that you'd be very much open to new ideas. Would that be right?
Yes, but I was always very prepared. When I read a script, I can see the show. I literally have one of those imaginations that when I read something, I see it. And as a result, I would be able to completely plan my day. I did shot lists. I blocked every scene ahead of time. I knew what I wanted. I would then tell the actors what I had in mind. If they had other ideas, we would incorporate it. We work it out. But that enabled me to be able to move very quickly. You know, some directors don't plan out ahead of time, and they start the scene, and you have a rehearsal, a blocking rehearsal, and it can take half an hour or 45 minutes. My blocking rehearsals took 5 minutes. And as a result, you get all that extra time to work and shoot during the day. So I would be able to get more coverage and better angles and use more complicated equipment. Depends on how you want to use your extra time. But my speed of being able to work was because I was so prepared. And yes, I was always open to ideas from other people. I was never an authoritarian boss. I liked input from people. And some of the best ideas came from other people.
And
also some of the worst.
In terms of then, say, Jamie, your directing style, if you were to describe your directing style to someone, what would you describe it as?
I'm very enthusiastic. I'm very clear cut. When we do the rehearsal, I let everybody know what all the coverage is going to be. So I say the master is here, then we'll do an over and over, do a dolly shot. So everyone is going to know what their next 2 or 3 hours of their life is going to be involved with. And then I married an actress, and so I I understand actors a little bit and what they need, and every actor is different, but I would always spend time with the actor, find out what it is their process required, what it is they needed to work well. And then I always tried to bring a sense of humor to what I was doing, so everybody had a good time on the set. I think all those things contributed to my success.
And how did you get into Star Trek originally then? I'm guessing, were you a fan from back in the days in the 60s, or were you completely a novice to it when, say, you would have spoken to Gene Roddenberry and Rick Berman in the 80s?
I was a huge fan of the original series. When I was in college, it ran every afternoon. I would always make sure I was in the fraternity house watching the show. So I knew it very well. And I was always a sci-fi fan. Even when I was a kid, 7, 8 years old, I was reading science fiction books. I always loved sci-fi movies, which I'd always go to and watch on television. So I was, the genre was very close to my heart. And the Star Trek thing, when they told me, I had to try to rein in my excitement because it's something I really wanted to do. And I was lucky to be able to actually stand on the set. I remember vividly the first time I transported people. They were landing on a planet. We were shooting it at a water treatment plant, and there were 9 of them landing. I think 8 or 9. I had to block them all. But the first time somebody said energize, and I freeze, step out, and you roll without them so they can later do the thing. It was a thrill for me just to do that.
What was it like the first time you set foot on the bridge of the Enterprise D then?
It was great. That show I recently looked at for another podcast. The first episode I did for the show, Justice, and I was shocked by how stiff the acting was by all of the people on the show. Yeah. And I think it was episode 5 or 6, I can't remember, but very early in the show. And then by the end of that season, it was much looser.
Yeah.
And I think there was a couple of reasons. One, nobody quite knew how to play it and what to do, and they didn't know their characters yet. But there was also Patrick. Patrick was very formal. His character was formal. He was English, and he was the boss. And I think a lot of them were subconsciously were sort of taking their acting style from him. So there was a stiffness to it that finally, of course, went away. But I was shocked when I saw that, and none of us knew what we were doing back then. With the show didn't know what it was doing. It took 3 years, I think, before it finally got into gear and started becoming so good.
He refers to it in his book, all right, about kind of like when he was, first on stage with the actors, that they just couldn't find their feet. They didn't know what was kind of going on. I think he treated it all very formally, whereas the rest were kind of a bit more relaxed about it. And I think he had a hard time then adjusting to that then as well. And Jamie, when you were directing then, you've given the script for Justice and things like that, and being a massive Star Trek fan at that point, obviously this is not Kirk, Spock and McCoy that you're directing and things like that. Were you kind of there going, oh my God, like how do I put my stamp on this incredible franchise that I've been such a fan over the year? Were you daunted by it, or were you there going, this is just another directing job, I've come in, I'm going to do my job like a professional and I'm out? Or did you say, I'm a fan, this is really weird? How did you approach it?
That script was very much TNG, the original series all over it. It just in terms of theme and mood and style. Those early Star Trek years looked like, the lighting was flat and bright and very much like the original series. So I just sort of had that in the back of my mind. But then you have to make sure you get the block it right, get the coverage for every scene, the masters, mediums, close-ups. And one of the things that I think endeared me to Rick Berman and the Star Trek producers was that being so prepared, I was able to shoot much more quickly and with much more coverage than the directors they had before me. So they were shocked by the amount of film I was delivering and thrilled by that because the more angles they get, the better, they have, the more room they have in editing and the more options they have per take in terms of delivery. So I think that pleased everybody very much.
Jamie, you only directed 2 episodes of the first season, as you said. You didn't come back until, Frame of Mind was in season 6, but you went to Deep Space Nine, say around 93 kind of thing. Why was there a couple of years of a gap, do you think, then? And did you wish that in the meantime that you would have been called back?
I was busy. I was called back.
Right, well, there it is.
I was producing a show called Paradise, which was a Western Lee Horsley played an outlaw her sister died, and he inherited 4 kids. And it was a great show on CBS. So I was executive producing that show, and that took all my time. I was writing, producing, directing on that show for 3 years, from '88 until '92. And then I did another show, Bodies of Evidence, with the same group. That was named Warner Brothers. So I wasn't available until 1992. I picked up the phone. I called Rick Berman. I said, "Hey, Rick, I'm available. Do you have anything for me?" And 2 days later, he had me an assignment to do episode, season 5. And then I left again because I did a show called Burke's Law and University Hospital. In fact, I got a call from Rick offering me the series finale for Next Gen. I wasn't available. The pilot for Voyager, and I wasn't available. And then when he called for the pilot for Enterprise, at that point I was executive vice president of Spelling, which was owned by Paramount. So I went to Aaron and Duke and I said, I've been offered to direct the pilot for Star Trek. They knew my history there, and they gave me a blessing to leave for 6 months to go do the pilot. So I was able to do that pilot.
Sorry,
Mike, go on.
I was going to say, do you have any regrets that you didn't get to do the pilot for Voyager and so on? Or are you okay with it?
Oh, well, there's nothing I can do about it. I would love to have done the series finale for Next Gen, but because it was such a fantastic show and such a great season finale, but I wasn't available, and I was doing something I loved in the meantime. So it was an abundance of riches to not be available to do something I really wanted to do because I was busy doing something I also really wanted to do.
And when you started to say you've gone from The Next Generation, you've been working on DS9, what did you feel was the difference between working on TNG and working on DS9?
I loved DS9. It was so dark, so different in terms of the character conflicts and the stories that they were telling. And the first one I did was Damage.
Yeah. And
Damage is such a surprisingly dark show with a shocking ending where the Cardassian is killed, or the guy is killed, and I just pulled back into a crane shot to the high wide thing. It reminded me of doing a student film because it was so not Star Trek.
Yeah.
But it was such great drama. That one has really held up well over the years.
In terms of, say, then, like, you've worked on Necessary Evil then as well, but I have to ask you then, Way of the Warrior was a massive turning point in not just, say, like Deep Space Nine, but kind of Star Trek as a whole. Yeah. We had never seen anything on Star Trek television to this scale. Like, I remember the build-up to it. It was like it was a movie that was coming out. And, like, the size of it, the scope of it, the battle scenes, the whole lot. How did you feel you kind of approached it? And are you kind of, when you look back at it now, because, like, it is absolutely still glorious, do you look back at it and say, that was actually brilliant? That's exactly what I wanted to achieve in terms of the size, the scope of the episode?
Yes, it was designed it was a 2-hour opening when they brought in Worf, and it was designed to be like a big, huge movie. We shot it like I would do a movie of the week, Star Trek movie of the week. We had some extra days to produce it over a normal episode schedule. And at the time, Rick wanted me to direct the upcoming feature that was going to be done, which was First Contact. So for me, it was kind of like an audition for Paramount Studios to show them I could handle this big project.
Yeah.
And then when it came time, I met with Sherry Lansing, and that went well. But then Patrick had director approval. And because I had worked with Patrick so infrequently, he really didn't know me. I worked with him on season 1 a couple of times. He was barely in Frame of Mind in season 5. So he didn't really know me, except by name and face. And he had director approval, and he wanted to go with Jonathan, who had directed, and I loved Frakes. So Jonathan ended up getting the assignment, did a fantastic job. It's my favorite of all the Star Trek movies. But when I was making Way of the Warrior, that was sort of my audition for the studio to try to get to do the feature. So in my mind, I was making a feature.
And when you were dealing with the DS9 cast versus the Next Generation cast, now obviously you would have dealt with the Next Generation cast in his first season when they were absolutely as wooden as a plank of wood. How did you find the cast in terms of how you dealt with them? Like, who was kind of more loose, who was more engaging, or were they both as engaging as each other?
The season 5 of Next Gen, when I did Frame of Mind, I had a great time with the cast, and these guys were best friends then. They're best friends now. They've all stayed in touch.
Yeah.
I still see and talk to a number of them, and that was the best cast for the series that I know of in terms of breakout stars that came from it, breakout characters that came from it.
Yeah.
There weren't nearly as many from Voyager or from long lasting or from DS9 or from Enterprise, but that DS9 or the next gen cast really was singular and fantastic. So each of the casts I really liked working with. Each of them I had good relationships with, but there's nobody who can compete with the next gen cast in my mind.
Was it easier to do Way of the Warrior because you'd already worked with Michael Dorn before? Or
Yeah,
was
I think
that-
so.
or was
We
that-
knew and trusted each other. Yeah, because he had to do it. And I like Michael's a great guy. He's just one of those really nice, friendly, happy-go-lucky, really talented, totally invested. And it was for him. It was a kind of a risky thing to come and do the show, but they were trying to get the ratings pumped, and it worked. So it was a great decision for everybody involved.
And like we all know, Michael Dorn is, as you said, when he's not in the Klingon makeup, he's this lovely, polite, quietly spoken man. What does he do to turn himself into Worf? Because as you said, when you deal with actors, you kind of, everyone has their different approach and things like that. What was Michael Dorn's approach?
I don't really know. All I know is that I've done a lot of Klingons in my career, and I love them. And for some reason, I always just sort of got the Klingons. But when you put that makeup on, and you have to act through the makeup, I think some of that personality comes through. And in his performance, he sort of set the template for all the Klingons after that. They were other versions of Michael. But I don't know. You'd have to ask him. You should get him on the show and talk to him about where he channeled, what part of his personality he dug into for that. But he was so good at it.
And in terms of, say, as you said, the Klingon experience and things like that, you obviously did the season 5 opener, Apocalypse Rising, which is set on a Klingon outpost, and there's about 100 million Klingons inside there. What did you enjoy most, and what was your kind of approach to kind of saying, right, these are Klingons being Klingon in a Klingon space. How am I going to kind of tap into this kind of cultural mindset?
I'm trying to think, Howard. It was, most of the people who played on that show had made it their point to watch Star Treks from the previous years to get an idea of how they should be acting. And the actors who played the Klingons, the most of the actors who played Klingons and a lot of the other aliens on Star Trek were Shakespearean actors, because they seemed to have a way of being able to act through the makeup and act in those big ways without overacting.
Yep. And
a lot of them were English. A lot of them were just trained Shakespearean actors, because there was a fine balance between being that big and seeing ridiculous. But they managed to pull it off, and I sometimes had to bring them up. I often didn't have to bring them down.
Actually, we had J.G. Hertzler on the show only a couple of weeks ago, and we were asking him about Colomini, and he told a story when you were making Apocalypse Rising, that there was a scene with J.G. Hertzler and Avery Brooks, and in the background, Colomini and René Auberjonois were making fun with each other. And apparently Avery Brooks didn't take too well to this and turned around and gave out to them like they were two school children and told them to kind of relax. Yes, pack it in, exactly. Yeah. So actually I wanted to check, what was it like directing J.G. Hertzler and Robert O'Reilly? Because when we spoke to JG, he's a complete force of nature. He's a magnificently wonderful man. But I'd love to know what it was like directing him.
Well, they needed very little direction in terms of performance, because they had it nailed. They knew exactly what they were doing. They always had their lines down. They were a joy. So for me, it was really just blocking them and chatting with them. They were great. They needed almost nothing from me in terms of performance. They were so good.
And what's like outside of the makeup, what is Robert O'Reilly like? Because obviously he plays this, fearsome Klingon with his incredibly piercing eyes staring straight at you. What kind of man is he when the makeup is off?
This night may not surprise you, but I haven't met many of these actors outside of their makeup. Because it took 4 hours in the morning to put on and 2 hours at night to take off. I never saw them out of their makeup. So there's times, in fact, when I was doing my first episode of Voyager, I said to one of the actors, "I'm going to hang around till you come out of makeup just so I can see what you look like." And
Yeah, I suppose that's a really good point. Yeah, it's so they do spend so long in makeup that yeah,
right.
unless you hang around for a good few hours afterwards, you're never going to see them.
And you moved on to Voyager then as well, Jamie. I'm just curious because obviously Voyager is a ship-based show in the same way, say, obviously TNG is. How, like, I suppose the best question is, how do you approach? Did you approach it kind of the same way? Look, obviously, you know, every episode is going to be different, but in terms of like, if there's any shots in, say, on the bridge, in the ready rooms, in the corridors, did you approach it differently? Because obviously, by the time you would have got onto Voyager, it's a couple of years since you would have done, say, the Next Generation and things like that. Or like, how did you approach it? In any way, like, was it different to the Next Generation, say?
You know, for me as a director, I always love moving the camera and big shots, big movements, small movements, depending on what was necessary. So each set presented new opportunities to discover ways to move the camera and explore the ship as well as the characters. And so I love the opportunity to go into all these different ships and find ways to shoot them that made them interesting. That was what was fun about doing the pilot for Enterprise, is I could help design the ship and where we would put the cameras and all of that. So with camera, with camera in mind in terms of all of those sets. So I enjoyed that part of it. The storytelling in terms of direction was pretty basic. It was very much like a TNG show with different characters.
Yep.
I loved the characters in that show. What's her name was fantastic to work with.
Kate Mulgrew?
Kate, I love Kate. And I'm really good friends still with Robbie McNeil. He's a really talented director now. And he has a place near me in Park City, so we see each other.
It's quite funny actually, because this morning I had this arrive, which is actually one of his comm badges.
Oh, how cool. You should reach out to him. He'll probably do your show. He's got his own podcast, so maybe you guys can cross-pollinate.
And just in terms of, say, you directed Death Wish in Voyager, which obviously had John Delancey, it had Jonathan Frakes in it. How did you, again, luckily enough, this time John Delancey wasn't in too much makeup. What is John Delancey like to direct? Because obviously by now he would have had the Q character very much down from having done it over the years. Did you find it took him, a bit of time to get into the character, or was he just straight in immediately into the character of Q?
Immediately into the character of Q. I love John. I've done a couple of Q episodes, and I did a video game. Star Trek did a video game a long time ago, and he was the star of that, and we worked together on that. He was great. That's my favorite Voyager episode, Death Wish. And I recently looked at it again for a podcast. I loved it. John is also, what's interesting about that show is it talks in a very serious subject matter about suicide and taking your own life and all those options. It's quite thought-provoking for its time, I think. But John was a delight, and he understood that character, and having him and Frakes together is always a lot of fun. John, have you had Jonathan on your show?
No, I've reached out to him once or twice, but again, yourself, I'd say every single podcast is always reaching out to people, so it's always kind of a fine balancing act when you're asking people. Jamie, one thing, in Death Wish, there's, like, when I was a kid, I kind of didn't really appreciate it. Now that I'm older, I kind of do. And when the second Q is talking about, like, the reason why he wants to end his life and things like that, and the allegory is like the desert, we've all been the road, we've all been whatever, and all that kind of thing. How much input did you have into the design, or did the script kind of take care of that all itself?
The script did. The location we went to was an old there's a diner, gas station sort of set that's used just for movies, and people change it around a lot. So that sort of fit the bill of the script. But no, that was all in the script. It was a great script. I had no one, an episodic director, he comes in, has almost no input to a script at all.
Right.
And we move on then, we're given the chance then to, as in you, is given the chance then to lead in the new series, Enterprise. This is going to be a very different Star Trek. It takes place before even the original series. And as you said, because of the fact that you got the pilot, you were effectively the one who drove the look of it because you positioned the cameras and things like that. How much creative freedom were you given then to kind of say, right, this is what the pilot's going to look like, this is how we're going to film the different sets and things like that? And did you really enjoy that challenge of saying, I'm going to put my stamp on the Star Trek galaxy really with this one?
I had a lot of opportunity to set up a lot of the look and the style of the show, how the camera's going to be used. And the DP, Marvin Rush, had been at Star Trek for a long time. He and I were old friends. He's an incredibly talented guy. In fact, I worked with him when I did that episode of Orville. He came in and did the first season of Orville. And so with him, we set the look, the style, the lighting, and that was great fun. I wanted it to feel like a cramped submarine as opposed to the big, gigantic ships like Next Gen had and Voyager had. So that was a lot of fun to work on and do.
So a bit of a random question. What was your favourite set to film on?
Oh, Mike, you've really done Jamie bad there with that question. That's not even the hard question.
A number of reasons. I loved the DS9 mall, because that's the biggest set of all the Star Trek sets.
Yeah.
With more nooks and crannies and places to put cameras and places and the two walkways and elevated walkways. So for that, just in terms of visually, that has to be the best set, just because it was a whole stage.
Yeah.
And I have to ask this, Jamie, because again, I am Irish at the end of the day. What was it like working with Colm Meaney?
He was great. Very funny guy. I never got to work with him enough, because I think later in the life of DS9, he got more and more to do. But I always enjoyed my time with him. He was great. He's a wonderful guy.
And when you directed In a Mirror Darkly, we return back to an original Constitution class bridge and things like that. Did you take your inspiration from the episodes of the original series you watched, or did you say, I'm going to do this differently and kind of get the angles that I want, or what way did you approach it?
Are we talking about Enterprise or
Enterprise?
Yeah.
That was fantastic. I mean, I did a version of that, I think, on one of the other series, but where they get to play the most evil versions of themselves. That was just, is that what we're talking about, that episode?
Yes, you're right. So you did Shattered Mirror in DS9, that's right. And
yes.
Then in a Mirror Darkly is the Enterprise one, where they are on the Defiant,
yeah.
And it's the Constitution class, yeah.
Yeah, and the actors loved it. I loved it. I've never had more fun directing the show, because everybody got to play these completely different versions of themselves, and they all stepped up and did really well. It was fantastic.
And what was it like directing on, say, a replica of the bridge of James T. Kirk's Enterprise?
That was really special. It wasn't finished until the very last day of shooting, because this was the first of a two-parter, and I only did the first part. And so I finally got to go sit on the bridge, and there's a picture of me sitting in the captain's chair somewhere.
That was going to be my question. Did you get to sit in the chair and take a picture?
I sat in the chair, and I got a picture sitting in the chair, but it was fun to go in and see that set, yeah.
What did it feel like sitting in the chair and kind of saying, my God, this is what William Shatner would have been looking around at like in 1966, and kind of just saying, oh my God, like as a kid, this was, my kind of, imagination home, and now I'm sitting here in this seat.
I didn't have that experience. I wish I had. I think if it had been lit as if it was an episode when I sat there, I think I was sitting in there and there was just house lights were on, so I wasn't fully immersed in it. We did light it and shoot in it. I should have done it then. But my personal experience, and also when you're directing, you've got so many things on your mind.
Yeah.
That even though I take 2 minutes to sit in the chair and get a photo taken, I'm already thinking about the next shot, and the next this, and the next that. I wasn't able to fully immerse myself in the moment.
So, Jamie, in terms of setting, say, as you said, Jonathan Frakes got the gig as director or First Contact and things like that. I'm just curious, when you watch the movie and it is your favorite movie and things like that, is there any part of the movie where you're kind of there going, if I had directed that, I wonder would I have done it differently in any shape or form? Again, not casting any comment on Jonathan Frakes' directing ability or anything like that. I'm just curious from an aesthetic point of view, is there anything you looked at and you might have said, I might have approached that from a different point of view?
No, not at all. The only thing I noticed is that they had cut a couple of scenes that were in the original script before they went to production, I think for money reasons or whatever. And some scenes I had liked that were not there. But no, Jonathan did a great job. And I don't go into movies looking for things not to like. I just try to get completely immersed in the film as an audience. And that's what I did there.
And if you were to look back then at the 18 episodes of Star Trek you directed, which is your personal favorite?
I'd have to say the pilot for Enterprise, because it was a 2-hour, big budget, 34-day production. So I had, a lot as we talked about, to say about the design of it, the casting of it. Usually you're episodic director, you're coming into a show that's already cast, you have no input. On a pilot, I get to have input about who is cast. So for me, it was wonderful. And then, just before it premiered, we had a screening in the big Paramount Theater, cast and crew screening, packed house, and next to me was my wife and my daughter, Katie. My other daughter was at school. So we're sitting in the middle, and there it was as a big screen movie with, surround sound and the whole deal. So it was a great, thrilling experience.
So when you were doing Broken Bow and you had some input into the casting, are you saying like for the regular cast, or are you just saying for the guest stars who would have actually been in the episode?
No, regular cast.
Oh, really?
Oh yeah, I was there for casting every character, absolutely.
Wow. Because we actually had John Fleck on the show as well a couple of weeks ago, the absolutely lovely John Fleck. And was he an immediate choice for Silic was there anyone else in consideration for his role when he went for it?
I think he may have worked, did he work at Star Trek before? Because it always seemed to me, I think he was always the one that it was already thought that John was going to be John. But there was, all the other characters, they were not cast when I got there. So we went through the whole process of meeting and casting, and everybody knew it was going to be, what's his name, the star?
Scott Bakula.
Scott was, because Scott had worked with the president of Paramount on Quantum Leap, and that's who we always knew it was going to be. But the deal wasn't made until the weekend before we were going to start shooting, and there was no plan B. Scott probably knew this. But Scott was a delight, embraced it completely. I loved working with him. Though there's a story that a lot of people don't know. I have mentioned this before, but the first week of shooting, we shot for a week, and the president of Paramount was in Europe on some network kind of stuff. Kerry McCluggage was his name, really nice guy. And he came back and looked at dailies, and he freaked out because he didn't like Scott's hair. Scott's hair was, I don't know if it was down when he wanted it up, or it was up when he wanted it down, but he had a vision of how Scott's hair should look, maybe from Quantum Leap days, I don't know. But he freaked out, he didn't like Scott's hair, and we had to go back and reshoot all of Scott's coverage from the first week when they redid his hair.
Oh my God, what?
Yeah.
And I suppose because he is the president, he can kind of get what he wants, really, can't he? I suppose if that was anybody else, it would have been that stuff off.
There's also a thing that happens that's very common, that studio executives have to do something to put their stamp on it. So they think they've made a major contribution and somehow saved the show. And that doesn't just apply to Carrie. I've never been on in a big project where somebody didn't have to piss on it somewhere to make their mark and feel like they had something to do with it. And in every big project I've worked on. So that's a pretty common kind of thing to happen. But I don't know, we certainly didn't mind the hair the way it was before, but it bothered him and he was the boss, so that's what you do.
I'm trying to, because I was a huge fan of Quantum Leap, and I'm trying to think back to what Scott Bakula's hair was like in that, and I can see his hair in the first season of Enterprise, and it was kind of like, short enough kind of thing. So I'm just curious, what was his hair like then before? What way did you have it when you shot it originally?
As I remember, there was some hair hanging down the front, either before or after. There was some change like that. Like I say, none of us thought it was a big deal, but Carrie did, so.
And in terms of
all the things to reshoot, it's just...
Yeah. And you have to go through, we literally went through all the film and wide shots of shots on the bridge from that first week. I would reshoot the wide shot and Scott's close up, but I wouldn't have to reshoot the other scenes because those were still fine. They would all still drop in.
Yeah.
So, interesting.
Oh my God. And in terms of then, say, if you were to look at all the other shows that you worked on as a writer, producer, director, and things like that, taking out Star Trek, what would your favorite show have been that you worked on?
I've been lucky to work on a lot of shows I've loved. I did Charm for 8 years. I love Charm. Great cast and crew. And I did a show at the end of my career called Magicians, which was a sci-fi show. Then it was on Netflix. And I loved that cast and crew. And it was 5 years, and I would do a couple a year. And I loved working on that show. That show was I don't know if you've ever seen it, but it's sort of like a sexy, edgy Harry Potter.
Yeah.
And I just loved that show. It was really good writing, really good people, and it was a great way for me to, when the pandemic came out, and you had to direct with masks on and shields. I said, okay, I'm done. That's enough for me.
Do you miss it, Jamie?
You know, I don't. I still dream about it. I'm working and on set a lot in my dreams, but I don't miss it. My life is full. I'm a photographer. I travel a lot. I've got great friends. I have a home in Los Angeles. I have a home in Park City, Utah. I've got 2 daughters, 2 grandsons, and I just, I actually, from starting really young, I always had retirement clearly as the goal for my career. I didn't want to get to be 75 years old and wish I could be on a set, have nothing to do with my life. I've always had other things that I wanted to do. I've written 3 novels. I've written 4 kids' books. There's always something that's keeping me interested in getting up every day, and that's how I feel now. I don't miss it at all.
So if you got the call Sunday and they said we've got new episodes of Strange New Worlds and we want Jamie Conway to come back one last time, would you consider it?
Strange New Worlds, absolutely. I love that show. That's my favorite of the new Star Trek shows.
Alex Kurtzman, you heard it here first.
So, Mike,
one of the executive producers from The Magicians actually is one of the executive producers for Strange New World. And part of his homework was he's watched every single episode of Star Trek leading up to. He watched, all of the we need a name for the Next Generation group, but he watched every episode from all 4 seasons, all 4 of those series besides the original series. And he called me after he saw Damage to tell me how much he liked that episode. But that's. And have you watched Strange New World? Do you know? Are you familiar with the show?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Well, the musical episode, I just thought was brilliant. I loved it. And we on Magicians, we used to do a musical episode every season. I did one of them. But on that show, they would take an existing song and sing that song without change, and sometimes change the lyrics, but not the song. Whereas on Star Trek, they invented new songs for it. It was so good to do that. It made a great change. It was great, and to see how talented all those actors are, it was really fun.
We actually had one of the actresses from that episode. Was it Rong Fu was in that one, Mike? Was that right? Yeah. So we had somebody on from Stranger Worlds only a couple of weeks ago. We were talking about that episode with them as well. Jamie, what was the name of the producer friend that you have who was on Stranger Worlds, so we can seek them out and have them on the show?
Henry, Alonzo. I'll get you his last name. I'm blanking on his last name. Myers. Henry Myers.
Henry Myers. Okay, that's cool. I'm gonna reach out. I'm gonna find Henry Myers. I'm gonna invite Henry Myers onto our show.
Just say that Jamie Conway promised that you would come on, and
that's right. I suspect I don't know if he does podcasts, but he would be someone great to talk to.
Oh, 100%, right. We're going to find him and invite him on, and we'll say that Jamie Conway has said he 100% wants to direct Stranger Worlds, and why has he not gotten the call at this point to do it already? Mike, I'm going to let you ask Jamie our final question.
Final question, Jamie. It doesn't take any thought whatsoever, but Jamie Conway, what does Star Trek mean to you?
To me, it means hope for the future. It was a great dream that there would be a world without war, a world without poverty, a world without discrimination, and that was always the guiding light of that series from the very original series. So to me, that's what still rings true in watching those episodes, and trying to bring truth and justice to other lands and other planets. So that's what I love about Star Trek.
Oh, that's awesome. Jamie, thank you so much for coming on the show, and to everyone watching and listening, if you'd like to catch up with more Clonestar podcasts, make sure you check out our website clonestarpod.com for amazing fan art and blogs written by you, our fans. Until next time, live long and prosper.